On Sunday, January 30th, in this brutal year of our Lord, 2022, the Cincinnati Bengals offense, headed by second-year quarterback Joe Burrow, came back from an 18-point deficit, tying the conference championship record to bring the game to a tie as well. Then, at the 13-yard line, Bengals kicker Evan McPherson would score the field goal in overtime that would clinch their 27-24 win over the Kansas City Chiefs.
20 of 26, 2 touchdowns for Burrow. Will have any Bengal fan smiling. What a game this has been on the opening Sunday for the win. The crowd in Cincinnati has the answer as the rookie Evan McPherson.
And just like that, the Bengals were going to the Super Bowl for the first time since 1988, which was around the time I was born. A Cincinnati native myself, I can't begin to tell you the boon of positivity that has swept through my hometown. And even a non-sports fan like myself can't help but feel a little bit inspired, feel a little bit more camaraderie with my fellow Cincinnatians. Here in the jungle, no matter who you are or where you are going, you best believe that if you shout, "Hooday!" you're going to get that "Hooday!" call right back.
Hooday! 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 Think I'll beat the Bengals! Hooday! 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 Think I'll beat the Bengals!
We're going through a tough time, is my point. Every city is. There's so much pain and suffering and disease and death. Society has become more atomized and adversarial. The unions are dead, and it's harder to find cohabitation and camaraderie offline. But our team was victorious, and now we have something to unite behind, something to rally behind. People young and old, rich and poor, all don the black and orange and raise their voices in unison to cheer on the home team, because our team gets to go to the big dance and perform for the whole world to see in one of the most watched events in the world. Sports are one of the few remaining pastimes that can bring people together. And I want to make it clear that I would never begrudge anyone that significance. As a former collegiate athlete myself, I know the positive roles that sports can play in our lives. And it isn't my goal to attack that. My problem is the corrupt, malicious, and exploitative corporate systems behind professional sports. After all, even though the Bengals are going to the Super Bowl, I will absolutely protest if they ever try to host it here. This is shaping up to be a busy year for international sporting events. As we speak, the Winter Olympic Games are being held in Beijing, China. Later in the month, the Super Bowl will take place. And in November of this year, the World Cup will be held in the Gulf state of Qatar. I think a little bit of history is in order. The Super Bowl is an NFL championship game that serves as the final game of the official NFL season. It has taken place since 1966, when the Super Bowl was created as a condition of the merger between the National Football League and their rival organization, the American Football League. The idea was to have the best teams from each compete against each other at the end of the season. Fun fact: while the NFL is definitely the most popular and well-known and highest-grossing American football league, it wasn't always the only place to find professional football. There used to be several professional football programs. In fact, the two conferences that make up the NFL, the NFC and the AFC, originated from the merger of the NFL and its rival, the AFL. All this to say, the Super Bowl is a big deal. The 2015 Super Bowl was the most watched televised event in United States history. Yes, even more watched than the moon landing. Let that sink in. A football championship game garnered more viewers than a man first setting foot on the moon. Oh well, if the moon landing wanted to get better ratings, perhaps they should have had Lady Gaga do a halftime show. More importantly though, the Super Bowl is a real part of North American culture. It is the second most viewed sporting event worldwide annually, first place being held by the UEFA Champions League final. But trust me, we will get to soccer later. Now, you would think that your city having its own pro football team would be a good thing. Unfortunately, it doesn't always shake out like that. Without even going into the myriad of scandals plaguing the National Football League and just focusing on the impact that NFL teams have, in their home cities, with one very specific exception, you will see a pattern of corporate malfeasance and misplaced priorities on the part of elected officials and city, state, and county governments. Let's start with my hometown for an example. Cincinnati, home of the Super Bowl-bound Cincinnati Bengals, has what the Wall Street Journal called one of the worst professional sports deals ever struck by a government. Paul Brown Stadium, one of only 3 stadiums in the league not named after corporate branding, is owned by the county. Hamilton County leases the stadium to the corporate entity that is the Cincinnati Bengals, and yet we have found a way to be the only landlord not making a profit off of rent seeking. This stadium cost $455 million to build. It seats 65,000, making it ineligible to host a Super Bowl as it fails to meet the minimum 70,000 seating requirement, but more on that later, put a pin in it. To finance this massive facility, the city took out loans and sold a public hospital. Yes, they sold a county-owned hospital to make up for budget shortfalls brought about by the operating cost of this stadium. But wait, there's more. The stadium cost so much, yet so failed to deliver on its promises of financial gains that a promised homeowners tax rebate for the county was cut back to almost nothing. But wait, there's even more. You see, as part of the agreement the county signed along with the lease, the county has agreed to certain provisions regarding the renovation and enhancement of the facility. If a pre-designated number of NFL stadiums get a certain feature that the Bengals Stadium currently doesn't have, then the county is required to provide that feature at county expense. And of course, if this feature will result in additional profits being generated from revenue, well, that all goes back into the coffers of the team ownership, not back to the city, and not back to the county. So this means that when enough other stadiums upgraded their screens to high definition, so did Cincinnati, at a cost of millions to the taxpayers. And when enough other stadiums added high-speed Wi-Fi access throughout their entire facility, you better believe Paul Brown Stadium was right behind them, at cost to taxpayers. This stadium, much like all pro sports stadiums, are sold on the lie of reinvigorating local businesses, but somehow all of these profits seem to wind up in the hands of the same few local investors. Investors and business owners who already hold a disproportionate amount of the wealth in town to begin with. In keeping with NFL regulations, all teams are capped at 32 shareholders, with one of them required to hold a minimum 30% share. It's almost as if the NFL doesn't want there to be any pesky thoughts of collective or community ownership, which is why they must hate Green Bay. Hey, that is that notable exception I spoke of. Grandfathered in prior to the 1980s rule change, the Green Bay Packers are a community-owned nonprofit entity. There are 45 directors that elect an executive committee of 7 who operate the corporate entity. The president is the only executive title that draws a salary, and when the rest of the teams have owners-only meetings to vote on league changes, the president of the Green Bay Packers Incorporated represents them in these meetings. It's not perfect by any means. They don't pay dividends, and the shares can only be sold back to the team at a fraction of the purchase price. But this ownership structure has meant that the team has remained in Green Bay, Wisconsin for almost 100 years, with little to no threat of jumping ship and moving to another city. It's literally in their charter that the team cannot move due to financial inducement. And if the team is sold, then all remaining money after expenses is to be donated to their charitable foundation. Now, as I said, Green Bay is the notable exception. Back home, here in Cincinnati, we have a team that is more than happy to siphon profits off of a wildly lopsided business arrangement, and should the city begin to question the merits of this relationship, weaponize the pride, nostalgia, and emotional attachment of the city against its own residents by threatening to pack up and leave town. And this is far from exclusive to Cincinnati. Similar stories exist across the country. Honestly, NFL teams are like abusive domestic partners. Wring you dry, trash your place, and then threaten to leave if you speak up. Oh yeah. A few years back, Cincinnati became financially responsible for all of the cleanup associated with hosting NFL games, to the tune of roughly $2 million a year. Don't stop and think about how many homes you could provide for the unhoused with that much money. Now we can talk about hosting the Super Bowl, which is basically a shorter term but larger scale representation of all the previously mentioned problems. In 2014, a document was leaked to the press showing the strict requirements the NFL had set for a city who wished to host the Super Bowl. Please, grab a seat, because this is going to knock your socks off. The league requires exclusive access to 3 top-quality 18-hole area golf courses at no cost so it can host a tournament on Super Bowl weekend. The NFL also requests the use of 2 top-quality bowling alleys at no cost for a bowling tournament the Wednesday and or Thursday before the Super Bowl. 16 months before the game, the NFL will send 180 people to the host city for a familiarization trip to inspect the region. The host city must cover all of the expenses. The host city must provide 40 3-bedroom, 52 bedroom, and 21 bedroom apartments for 30 to 40 days stays for working staff such as production and security. The apartments must be within a 20-minute drive to the stadium and have amenities such as Wi-Fi, full kitchens, washer and dryer facilities, televisions in the bedrooms, and a workout facility on the property. The NFL requires a hotel with a minimum of 1,000 rooms for their use, with free items such as beer, snacks, internet, meeting spaces, free parking, and storage space. The NFL must be allowed to install ATMs in the stadium that accept preferred credit and debit cards. The league may also cover up or remove ATMs belonging to other banks if they wish to do so. If cell phone signal strength at the team hotels is too weak, the host committee must install boosters or erect portable cell towers. Hotels, where the players stay, must carry the NFL network on their cable TV systems for a year prior to the Super Bowl. The host city must give the NFL the use of at least 20 billboards at no charge. The city must cover the expense of providing the NFL with a task force devoted strictly to busting game ticket counterfeiters. Police escorts need to be provided to move the teams, media, and game officials to and from the airport, practice facilities, and game at no cost. On game day, the NFL gets access to 35,000 parking spots near the stadium at no cost. In the event of a snow or ice storm on game day, the city must give priority to the NFL over all other ice and snow removal projects except in the case of threats to public safety. The host city has to create a clean zone in a 1-mile radius around the stadium where certain activities are restricted about a week before the game until the Monday or Tuesday after. This basically means that no one can do anything in the clean zone that the NFL doesn't approve of. After the game, the host city must remove the playing field. Remove the field at its own expense, and if the league requests it, give those pieces of green back to the NFL so it can sell them as licensed products and memorabilia. And I should really make sure that I drive the point home. Everything that I just listed off is expected to be covered at no cost to the NFL. And despite this god-awful deal, the NFL has the nerve to sell the prospect of hosting a Super Bowl to cities like it's some sacred privilege. Please, beg us for the opportunity to get ripped off by us. The NFL knows this is a breathtakingly expensive endeavor. So to counter very valid concerns about the cost of hosting, the NFL claims that the Super Bowl can bring in $300 to $500 million in revenue to the city for this one event. Now, there has actually been some fairly in-depth research into these claims of revenue generation, and suffice to say, their numbers are a little shaky. It is very much the subject of debate to this day. I won't delve into that because I don't know how to read financial talk, but I'll link a very interesting study in the description for those of you that are a little more well-versed in their weird foreign language. Ask yourself something. How much of that money is going to the betterment of the city? How much of that money is going back in the hands of the residents? Because I've been to a number of big citywide events in my lifetime. Music festivals are an expensive hobby of mine. I have a fairly firm grasp of what people visiting a city for a big event spend their money on. Eating out at restaurants, hotel accommodations, airline tickets, taxis, Ubers, maybe some high-end retail shopping, possibly even some local secondary attractions like theme parks and museums. This money is not going into the coffers of the city. Remember, the city has to kill 35,000 parking spots at their own expense for the event. That means that even if they would normally be receiving the income from paid parking in the city for this event, they are taking a huge hit. They have to eat the cost of 1,000 luxury hotel rooms, as well as catering, transportation, police details, which from experience I can assure you will run hundreds of dollars an hour. Most of the money being spent is going back into the hands of large private entities, not the public sector. Oh, the big hotel chains will see a big boost in their revenue. The fancy, hip, overpriced bars and clubs downtown will pull a slight boost in sales if the crowd out doesn't swing too far to negatively impact their revenue. Oh, what's a crowd out? Well, crowd out is when a large event that is known to draw large crowds dissuades large portions of the population who would otherwise patronize local businesses from doing so. They just don't want to be around a massive crowd of out-of-towners. But go ahead, do your own digging. Look at cities that have hosted the Super Bowl. They don't improve the lives of the residents of that city after the fanfare has ended. They still ignore their unhoused population, they still gentrify neighborhoods and push out lower-income minority populations. Nothing changes other than a few people getting to add a couple zeros on their spreadsheets. And that's taking the NFL at their word about the supposed financial benefits of hosting the game. Many cities were left in debt after hosting. And remember, the NFL doesn't share any of the profits, ticket revenue, or merch revenue with the hosting city. The Super Bowl is bad for your city, and I feel sorry for urbanites whose city has decided to fall for this grift. The NFL is a garbage organization run by oligarchs and solely driven by profits. And they're almost as corrupt as the IOC. Hey, that's the next topic. As this video is being made, the Winter Olympic Games are beginning in Beijing, in the capital of the People's Republic of China. The Winter Olympics are organized by an NGO sports authority called the International Olympic Committee, or IOC. The modern Olympic Games are an international sporting event inspired by the ancient Olympic Games held in Olympia, Greece as far back as the 8th century BCE. The IOC oversees the Summer Olympic Games, or Summer Games, the Winter Olympics, and the Youth Olympics. There are a number of smaller contests that they also organize, including the Paralympics for athletes with disabilities, the World Games for sports that aren't contested in the Olympic Games, and the Continental Games, like the Pan American, the African Games, the Asian, etc. Now, an entire video could be made about the corruption and scandals that the IOC has been involved in. That's not what I'm going to focus on today. But know that it's about as crooked and devious as any organization made up of rich white dudes masquerading as a non-profit could be. My main focus is on the hosting cities of the Olympics. Hosting the Olympics is considered one of the greatest honors to ever be bestowed upon a city and country. We've already explained the significant cost of hosting a single game on a single weekend in one city. Now imagine the nightmare of hosting tournaments for 10 to 20 to 30 sporting events over the span of 2 weeks. It becomes rather obvious why the most common host countries tend to be larger world powers who have the infrastructure or the capital to create the infrastructure necessary. The IOC doesn't have a set list of requirements for selection of their host cities. Cities instead send proposals to the IOC. It truly is a massive diplomatic endeavor, and cities looking to host the Olympics will try anything. In 2007, Chicago famously tried to bid for the 2016 Olympics, and they pulled out all the stops. Spent millions just on the proposal package. Wined and dined the IOC guests. Oprah Winfrey and Michelle Obama made speeches, and sitting president at the time, Barack Obama, literally traveled overseas to meet with the IOC and formally show his support for the bid. Ultimately, Chicago would lose this bid in a stinging defeat. At least part of losing their Olympic bid was attributed to the work of oppositional organizations like the Unlympic Committee and No Names Chicago. They organized massive grassroots protests against the hosting bid in the city, going so far as to send a package to the IOC's head office. And if you're wondering why anyone would form organized protest against hosting the Olympic Games, don't get ahead of me. The IOC selects the host city via vote by a secret ballot. Usually, when the city's bid is selected, there's a large celebration. But now we have to ask, is it worth it? So we're talking about the cost of hosting a Super Bowl in the tens of millions of dollars. The cost of hosting the Olympics adds up to the billions. The Olympics basically takes all of the problems a city could face hosting a Super Bowl and amplifies them by several orders of magnitude. We are talking about events that require the use of some 30 sports venues that could be across hundreds of miles, spanning multiple cities or even states. The traffic is unspeakable. London famously debuted a new feature of the Olympics in 2012 with specially designated traffic lanes on public streets reserved solely for Olympic vehicles. Then you also have to consider housing for thousands of athletes from around the world who speak dozens of different languages, and it needs to be secure housing. And now I have to talk about Munich. In 1972, in Munich, Germany, a group of Palestinian terrorists called Black September kidnapped several members of the Israeli Olympic team. Ultimately, the rescue attempts were poorly handled by the German authorities, and the hostages all died. In the aftermath, Germany created the world-renowned counterterrorism unit GSG-9, and Israel carried out assassinations on a couple dozen people. What? Oh, did you forget that part of the story? Look, I know that we must take care when criticizing the state of Israel and their violent nationalistic actions, but this is a very real thing that happened. It's been dramatized in films by the likes of Spielberg, using guns and bombs. Mossad operatives committed targeted killings against a number of people suspected to be connected with the Munich massacre, and some other people who had loose ties to those targets, and some people happened to just be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Targeted killings are a tool that the IDF have not been shy about using since the creation of Israel, as opposed to people being held on trial and given the opportunity to mount a legal defense. If the IDF decides that you're a threat, eligible cruise missiles in your area are looking to mingle. Missiles provided by the United States, I should add. After all, a tiny country doesn't get this much firepower and confidence to assassinate foreign nationals across multiple borders on their own. I feel like I've gotten off track. Right, I was talking about athlete housing. The aforementioned massacre in '72 is the reason that the Olympic Village is now one of the most fortified housing blocks on the planet for 2 weeks every 4 years. And this protection is expected to be provided by the military or police of the host city. None of these things are free. Costs add up quickly. Many countries have had difficulties finding new use for these facilities once the games are over, and so these massive, expensive complexes sit abandoned, ghosts of forgotten grandeur and pageantry, like the Olympic pool in Rio, the stadium in Sochi, or the beach volleyball arena in Athens, and many, many more. Massive, multi-million-dollar husks crumbling under the cruel, unforgiving sun. Maybe you're beginning to understand why people in Chicago were protesting the hosting bid. Maybe they didn't want to watch millions of dollars be poured into massive competition facilities, only for them to be abandoned while thousands of people still sleep on the streets and many children still attend crumbling, underfunded schools. But there's a bigger issue that I have with Olympics, and it's a philosophical issue. When the Olympics aren't held in the United States, we tend to see the host city as a representation of its surrounding nation as a whole. The IOC doesn't select countries, they select cities. But when you hear about the games being played in London, you envision England. When you hear about the games being held in Athens, you think of Greece. And when you hear that the games will take place in Beijing, you think of China. And that's exactly what all of these nations want you to do. Opening ceremonies at the Olympics usually include a procession of athletes, preceded by some form of entertaining performance. Famous singers, marching bands, dance troupes, fancy light shows, fireworks. They tend to put on a pretty big production. China famously upstaged the whole world with their 2008 opening ceremony, showcasing a beautiful synchronized series of performances drawing from the cultural background of the People's Republic. And as a lover of showmanship and live performances, I gotta say, it was pretty awesome. London would completely jump the shark when they had Daniel Craig in character as friggin' James Bond, escorting the Queen to the arena for the opening ceremony. And what is the takeaway from all of this pageantry, from all of this performance? Well, as I said before, the IOC doesn't actually select host countries. They only select host cities. But the countries where these cities are located make sure that you are presented with a culturally significant display of the country's wealth and creativity. You watch these opening ceremonies and you think to yourself, wow, China is awesome. Wow, the UK is awesome. Wow, Rio is awesome. And that's exactly what they want you to think. The true goal of hosting the Olympics is not to foster a sporting and competitive culture within your borders or to celebrate the heights of human accomplishment. No, it's nationalism and jingoism. Come and join this city for a great rally in support of a great glorious state. And under no circumstances should you ever let any of the problems in these cities and countries creep into your head. Banish the thoughts entirely. There's nothing at all suspicious about that, right? Right? The FIFA World Cup, often referred to as the World Cup, is an international association football competition. It is contested by the senior men's national teams of the members of the Fédération Internationale de Football Association, or FIFA. Football in this context refers to the game that the rest of the world plays, the one where you kick the ball with your feet. Hey, maybe this will help bring my non-American audience into the double digits. Anyway, it takes place every 4 years and is one of the largest events in the world. FIFA selects a host nation to hold the contest, and like the other two events we've spoken about already, countries clamor for the opportunity to have 32 football teams hold a tournament within their borders. The host country is chosen in a vote by FIFA's council. Prospective candidates get a visit from inspectors to make sure that they meet the requirements needed to host the event. Usually the decisions are made 6 to 7 years in advance of the event. There is a massive list of corruption cases that involve FIFA and its leadership. President Sepp Blatter handed out some 1 million euros in bribes in an attempt to secure his re-election. In 2014, 9 FIFA officials were arrested for corruption. In 2015, a match fixer named Eric Ding was sentenced to 6 years in prison for bribing FIFA officials with the prostitutes to get them to fix the matches they officiate. 14 FIFA officials and marketing executives were indicted in the United States and brought in under the RICO Act for wire fraud, racketeering, and money laundering. In 2010 and 2011, evidence surfaced that suggested that 2 executive committee members had taken payments from the nation of Qatar, who would ultimately win the bid. And honestly, do I even need to say any more? FIFA is a massive organization that has made it clear that they value profits over the athletes, the people who make up the sport they claim to represent. There has been a long history of racism among European football associations. FIFA is an immensely sexist organization that has blocked women from leadership roles for nearly a century. And as is almost always the case with these things, FIFA contributes nothing to the costs of staging the tournament, but they still take upwards of 70% of television revenue of one of the most watched events ever. They regularly pocket billions in profits from each event. Now, hopefully by now, you are seeing the bigger, overarching issue behind all of this. These events all follow similar patterns and all have very similar effects on the local communities in the areas where they are held. It's a fairly common and depressing practice that members of the unhoused population are run off by armed authorities. They raid and bulldoze encampments. They vet and oftentimes suppress more unique elements about local and indigenous cuisine and culture. Things like wet markets and street food vendors are often banned from working in the areas surrounding the competitions. These events usually also lead to massive spikes in human trafficking in the regions where they take place. After all, you get a bunch of rich white guys new in town and they're going to do what rich white guys in foreign countries do. And all of these governing bodies have shown little interest in pushing for solutions for the societal ills. The NFL is too busy making sure that the local golf courses and bowling alleys are up to snuff. The Olympic Committee is checking out the anti-aircraft gun installations on top of the Olympic Village buildings, and FIFA demands that countries override their bans on alcohol sales at football events because it would upset their sponsor, Bud Light. Yes, these are all things that happen. While writing this script, I found out that the NFL denied the request to allow our home stadium to host a watch party for the Super Bowl. Because who cares about the rest of the fans who don't have money for a $5,000 ticket? And while we're talking about my city, last year they hosted a themed soccer week because Cincinnati has it in their head that they now want to court FIFA for the opportunity to host international soccer events. Especially since over the last few years, we've gotten our own Major League Soccer team here in town. I think that I might be going and voicing my opposition to this if FIFA decides to take these requests seriously. And if your city wants to host an international sporting event, you should do everything in your power to make it clear that you don't want it to happen. These massive competitions only serve the state by allowing them to put on a facade, to tell the world that our city is great and everything is fine. Everything is not fine. Every major city in the country where I live has a history of genociding the natives, oppressing Black and Hispanic workers, and pillaging minority neighborhoods for urban freeways. Everything is not fine. So don't bring your party here and pretend that it is. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please click like and subscribe, and make sure you click the little bell to ensure that you see future videos. Follow me on Twitter at car_YZ to hear my Super Bowl prop bets for the upcoming big game. Follow me on Twitch at car_YZ, where I play games, give lectures, and work on music. And if you're so inclined to support the channel, I do have a Patreon at car_YZ. Thanks again.